Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You listen to the Coaches Panel.
James Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hello friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. Number 7 in my 50 most relevant for 2021 is a player that moved clubs during the off-season. New GWS ruckman Braydon Preuss. Can he be that mid-price standout player, or will he burn us in 2021? We are going to talk about that and plenty more on this episode. Joining me to chat about him, I've got Kane on. Hello, buddy. How are you?
Very well, MJ. I think this is a guy that, if a few things had fallen his way, maybe with forward status, maybe with a better buy, I think this guy could have been number 1, especially with the forward status. That would have been absolute no-brainer, lock it away. But we didn't quite get that, and now it's one of those players that, again, is super polarising in how we structure our starting squad.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. I'll be honest with you. Braydon Preuss is not an upgrade target. He is he is a start or pass option. Now, when I say not an upgrade target, now you might change strategy mid-year, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but you are not looking at him going, about round 13, he's looking tasty as an upgrade target. All right, let's get into it. 25 years old, finally finding himself at a club where he can be the number 1 ruck at GWS. His best score last year from only a handful of games at Melbourne last year was a 65 in AFLFantasy and DreamTeam, while it was against the Collingwood Football Club, while in SuperCoach it was an 85 against the Bulldogs. Nowhere near his career scores either of those games. They both came against Carlton back in 2019. It was a 108 for AFL Fantasy, while it was a pretty tasty and very nice 140 in SuperCoach. That is what has got people excited about him in that format. Last year, he averaged 50 in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam. It's been adjusted up in AFL Fantasy, multiplying it by 1.25 to a 62.5, while in SuperCoach, 62 is exactly what he's going to be priced at from an average perspective, and priced at $303,000, $377K in AFL Fantasy, and just marginally under that, just under $370,000 in DreamTeam. And Kane, a few years ago, Braydon Preuss moved clubs. He left North Melbourne. He was on the outset. He was looking for more ruck time, looking for more consistency of game time. And where did he go? Melbourne, to where the best ruckman in the land has played. 2 years later, after really just a handful of games at Melbourne, he now finds himself, after 10 games at the Demons, finally at a club where he could be the number 1 ruck choice.
Yeah, and I guess you'd have to think for Braydon that he's probably timed his run perfectly now if he's actually ready to take on that sole ruck mantle. You know, he's a great age, turning 26 this year. Yeah. Maybe it was one of those moves in hindsight where, he liked the security of going to Melbourne. He probably thought, especially when he came over for the 2019 season, Melbourne had really pushed deep into finals, and it was probably a piece that if Max Gorn was to go down, they really could have used a really solid backup. Yeah. We know in the 2 seasons he was there, Melbourne didn't play finals, and they weren't in the mix at all. So I've got to think positively that this was, he wanted to go for those reasons, be at a club that he thought could maybe challenge and be a really important cog if something was to happen to Max Gorn. And we know they did trial a little bit of tandem work at times with him mainly as a key forward. But I got to think now that he's 26, been in the system for a while, and he's found a club where he is the guy. Yeah. It is so far and away the guy, and that's clearly where all the excitement comes from.
It certainly does. He's moved to GWS. Sam Jacobs has retired, who they recruited just the 12 months earlier. Shane Mumford is now 74, and he's even aging for another year. So he finds himself with the dream scenario for fantasy coaches and for him himself. Clear first choice ruckman. The other rucks they've got are young and developing. If GWS felt they were ready, blokes like Flynn, they wouldn't have targeted a Preuss. So Preuss, I believe, is going to get and should get that first opportunity at that ruck role. When we look at what he did from a fantasy perspective over the past couple of years, it's not great, to be honest. Last year, just the 3 games for AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam was an average of 50, while in SuperCoach it was a 62. But there are 2 games of 80 plus. Importantly, his midfield minutes and rucking minutes in these games were severely impacted through a lack of opportunities due to one Max Gawn playing in the side. Last year, there was one game where he kind of got a good opportunity, and that was that round 13 game against the Bulldogs. 31 hit-outs, that 85 that I alluded to. The week earlier against Collingwood, 24 hit-outs, 84 in SuperCoach. So those adjusted scores of a 60, 65, let's call that an 80 for sake of a better term, adjusted up in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. So that's not too bad. You head into his 2019 season again, still playing at the Melbourne Football Club at that time. 7 games, an average in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team of 56, while in SuperCoach it was an average of 67. What doesn't sound great there. Look into the numbers a little bit and what was happening inside those games. In round 5 against St Kilda, he did play a shared ruck role with Gawn in that game, but he still managed to deliver us an 83 in Dream Team and Fantasy and 97 in SuperCoach. Later on in the year, he played sole ruck. He was a late in for Gawn. 15 possessions, 5 marks, 44 hit-outs. DT ton, a career score for him across the formats this game. 108 in Dream Team and Fantasy, 140 in SuperCoach. While at North Melbourne, again, we go back all the way to 2017. He solo rucked against the Cats. Round 2, he gave us a 105 in Dream Team and Fantasy, a 111 SuperCoach. A week later, because he came in as a late in for Goldie in that game, a week later, they kind of let Goldie play a lot of time forward. I think he only had like 10 hit-outs in that game, so as opposed to the 20 to 30 that Preuss ended up delivering. He delivered in that game a 105 in Dream Team and Fantasy and 87 in SuperCoach. And so before we even look at what he's done in a second tier, here's the important thing. He can hit a ton. He can hit a high 80s, and at that price point, man, that's all we need.
Well, that's the thing, MJ, and he's proven in the VFL, where he played most of his footy, that he was one of the best scorers in the whole competition. So we've got to think that scoring is there.
Yeah.
The question is, how much scoring? We know a key ruck role is a very lucrative role in fantasy. It's very hard to really go under 85 if you're a guy that's taking 80% of the ruck centre bounces, you're following it around the ground, and you look at that GWS side, they're very well stocked up forward. He doesn't need to play that split role at all. Like, for me, he's on the ground as the ruck, he takes his time on the bench, and then he comes at Himmelberg or wherever they feel like in that Giants side can be the pinch hit guy.
Yeah.
But when Preuss is on the ground, he's the ruck. I don't think you have to worry about any of those split games. Even some of the ones you mentioned in previous years when he was at Melbourne, the scores that he got that were solid, 80-plus scores, he had to kick multiple goals. So really, we've only seen a few games as the sole ruck. We haven't seen it for a season. The good thing is at the price, we're not really asking for a season. We're probably asking for realistically 8 to 10 games is what we want out of Braydon. Now, the challenge with that is, firstly, he's in a line where he's not going to be a keeper. Some of these guys we can take flyers on, especially in the back line or the forward line, at his price, let's use SuperCoach, the low 300s. Sometimes if you hit it right, they're in your side the whole year and you're very, very happy. Yeah. It's not going to happen with Braydon. I don't think anyone has the expectation that he's a keeper for the whole year.
Well, you'll be disappointed if you do. Yeah.
You will, because I think 100 is about the best you could hope for in SuperCoach. And I think probably, low 90s is the best you could hope for in DT. Yeah. Now, we know that Gawn and Grundy alone are anywhere from 25 to 30 points better off. So you have to get those guys in at some point. You just have to. So there's no chance of him being a keeper for the whole year. It has to be an upgrade. The other challenge is, how do you compare him to the Wayne Miller's, the Dyson Heppels, the Jackson Hateleys, who are similarly priced and also have shown good scoring potential as well? And then thirdly, MJ, you touch on the fixture. We need a good start. And the fixture's really, really hard in the opening 4 weeks, especially. St Kilda, Marshall Ryder. Fremantle's probably one of the easier pickings, especially with Sean Darcy going down. Is it finally time that we see a Lloyd Meek? Is it just the classic Rory Lobb has to step into that ruck role, even though we know he doesn't want to play there? And then you hit the 2 big boys, the 2 hardest guys to score against. Round 3, Melbourne, and round 4, Collingwood. That's the worst possible time to have those games because again, even if he has a big score against Freo, you only get to use it twice in your price projections before it rolls out.
Yeah.
So now you've got a score against Melbourne and a score against Collingwood that are going to hang around for 3 weeks each. And that's taken you to about round 7 or 8, when ideally you're hoping to make a move.
Yeah, I think what makes him such a fascinating player to look at, and the reason we haven't spoken too much about what he did at a secondary tier is because there have been plenty of players that have dominated at a second tier level and then just not done it at the AFL level. We've seen Preuss be able to do it at the AFL level, so there's no point going back to the VFL stats when we know what he can do at the elite level. So that's why we haven't gone and look at the double hundreds and look at the 160s he's done at the VFL. Who cares? Because he's done tons in Fantasy and Dream Team and 140s in SuperCoach. So that's why we're not spending much time on the deep dive numbers about that. But when you're looking to someone at Braydon Preuss, it is as an R2 selection. He's not leading your ruck division. He is there for maybe a number of reasons. Firstly, to give you a look at how these other premium rucks go. Do you have that concerns about a split ruck share of Gawn and Grundy? Do you have that concern that Marshall might not be as big as we'd expected? Do you think Riley O'Brien's hot run to the end of the year was just that? A hot run. And so you're just trying to bide your time. You don't feel confident with 2 set and forget rucks. So Preuss gives us that opportunity to look, and that's what we want. But at his price point, what does he need to do to deliver well? Because in terms of to make that selection worthwhile, because you brought up this great point, that early fixture is nasty. It eases a little bit for 2 more weeks, Sydney and Bulldogs, but then it goes back to Adelaide, then into Essendon. Richmond might be a little bit easier from them, and then round 10 it's up against West Coast. So you could probably say 3, maybe up to 4. Are relatively games where you go, I think Preuss is probably on top of most of these guys. And then it gets tricky. At his price point, he just needs to deliver what? A 70, 80 in fantasy? Are you happy if he comes out of that first 6 weeks, Kane, with a 70? Is that enough for us in fantasy and a low 80s in SuperCoach? Is that enough given the amount we're paying for? Because I think some people are expecting him to average 90 over the first 8 to 9 weeks. And while it's possible, statistically, I'm a little hesitant to get on that train.
Yeah, I wouldn't be happy personally if he's in the 70s. That's not enough. Again, I mentioned the guys that he's going up against, Heppel, Haitley, Miller in defence. Take your pick in the forward line of some of those, maybe key forward types that we know have a ceiling about them. Franklin, Danaher, even Zeebel's super cheap in SuperCoach. So, for me, I think he's got to be, 85 is what you have to have your expectation to be. The great thing is, if he can do that for 3 or 4 weeks, he'll at the very least net you 100, 150K.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that I think would be the dream scenario is that he has a little run like maybe a Mark Pitnet had when he came into the Carlton side last year, where it's, his first 3 games, it was out of this world. He was up around the 90 DT mark converted and the low 120s through 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Now, we know afterwards, MJ,
not pretty.
It was really ugly. And that's the risk with these type of guys. Again, I think everyone believes that Preuss is better than Pitnet.
Yes.
But it's a big jump to be competing against, the live sets. These guys that are, your very solid 7th to 8th to 9th best rucks in the comp. It's not easy to score on these guys. You know what I mean? Like, it's tough. It's tough to be consistently good for week on week. And when you've got 2 of the hardest guys in the first 4 weeks, probably capping that scoring power. Again, Preuss might be able to have a good game against those guys. Absolutely. But odds says usually you're about 15 to 20 points down on your average when you play those guys. Like, it is that difficult and they're that good. And then conversely, if you're taking them on if you're skipping a Gawn or a Grundy to go with Preuss and they get a hold of you in those weeks, you could be losing 50, 60, 70 points alone on that one matchup.
Yeah.
If they can feast. So, again, it's one of those things where there's definitely value there, MJ. There's definitely the possibility to make, as I said, 100, 150K pretty comfortably by about round 8 to 10. I don't think that's outrageous. But there is a lot of competition in that mid-price role with guys that, move to a new club and look promising in a Haitley, or guys at the other end of the spectrum, like, maybe a Dyson Heffel who, he's been a 90 guy for a decade, MJ, and we're getting him at a bargain price. So there's a lot of ways to cut it, especially when you know that you have to upgrade Preuss. The dream scenario would have been that Preuss has the buy after a Gawn or Grundy.
Yeah.
And you can write him up, he plays the extra, and you move him to one of them. Unfortunately, those guys have the last buy round. So you're going to end up trading into the same position as pretty much the rest of the competition. You're not going to have any real buy advantage. You've got no DPP with him to provide coverage to those guys. So for me, it really comes down to what do you think he's going to score versus the other mid-prices? And also, do you need a mid-pricer? Do we get enough rookies that you can just go, I'm just going to take away any stress of having to upgrade the ruck line because we know it's a chaotic line as it is?
Yeah.
I'm just going to start with, if I think it's Grundy and Gawn, if I think it's Riley O'Brien and Grundy, whatever your combination that you have a lot of faith in, I'm just going to lock it away and I'll worry about shuffling in the other lines.
Yeah, I think he's such a fascinating player, and the potential flip of why I think he's going to... The reason he's in the top 10 and in at number 7 is because if he delivers towards his potential, man, are you absolutely flying. Equally, if you go against him, whether it be setting it, forget rucks, or you look for other options, maybe use the Marshall, who we talked about earlier, about a week or so ago in the 50 most relevant, you use that DPP link to open up opportunities. If he doesn't, man, are you playing catch up against these big boys? Just in SuperCoach, for example, it's $1.4 million to start Grundy and Gawn. $1.4 million to start those two. What Preuss offers you this opportunity, if you have any level of hesitancy about multiple premium rucks, maybe you're like, I'm all in on Gawn and everyone else I'm a little cagey about, even a Marshall, Preuss gives you a chance to have a look. And if all he has to do is if he holds around that 80s marker across the formats, because I know he's got the potential to hit the ton, that's enough for me. Now it's not as good as I'd love it to be. Of course I want him hitting 90s in Dream Team and Fantasy. Of course I want him going Pitternet style for 3 weeks of a ton. But if he holds an 80 in DT and Fantasy, or there and thereabouts, it's enough because I'll still make cash. Is it more than what I want? No, of course I want more. But it's not a fail. A fail's if he starts to deliver 60s. If he starts to deliver that kind of territory, okay, you need to adjust really, really quickly. But you do bring up that interesting point of if our big premium rucks fire early, it's like if you go against any big premium, isn't it, Kane? If they fire early, it is a long way to get up to it, or you are drastically changing your structure to get him.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the really hard part, MJ, is that even if we thought Preuss did really, really well, and he just say he did average 100, he's probably going to get up to, the low 500K mark in SuperCoach. Now, you're probably, at best case, you're hopefully maybe only 100K away. That would be, a dream scenario.
Yeah.
The hard thing is we know with these guys, and we saw it with people with Pitnet, is if that bad score comes, your window to jump off is very, very narrow. So that's the thing that makes it hard, and that's where some coaches will just look past him because they don't want the stress of being without a Grundy or a Gawn who can really take the season away. They're obviously captain options, all that great stuff. But then again, there'll be people who think, no, this guy, this is his chance. He's ready. He's in a great midfield around him, especially in SuperCoach. We know how important that is. He is mobile. He is a guy that can lay a tackle, can get around the grounds, and I only need him for a period of time. Yes, it's going to be painful not having a Grundy or a Gawn for that stretch.
Yeah.
But as we always say, it's not just about one player or two players. It's the whole squad. If you can allocate that cash elsewhere, and get a return, I totally get it. Personally, I'm more of the fan of. I'm so confident in Grundy and Gawn being the top tier.
Yeah.
that I'm going to start with them from the outset, and as a result, that means, a Braydon Preuss isn't in my plan. Now, the only format that's probably different for that is AFL Fantasy, just because of the nature of, how many trades you have. And
Yeah.
You can restructure very quickly. You can lose a premium mid and bring in a Gorn or a Grundy that way, and then have another mid price. So it's a lot more fluid. I just know if you start having an injury to Preuss, or if he's struggling in the first 5 weeks, you've really got to sacrifice a premium in a restricted trades format to move him on, because the last thing you want to do is go to another sideways option and all of a sudden you're burning trades without making any real progress. That's always the risk with a player in that line without DPP. Again, maybe you offset that, MJ,
with
by
Marshall.
putting a Marshall forward. That is definitely something that gives you the flexibility of only having to use one trade to move a Preuss on,
That's
as
right.
opposed to, so again, we always talk about supporting yourself, giving yourself out to make life easier. And I would have to say that if you are going the Preuss route, think very strongly about having Rowan Marshall in your side as well, just to help you with the eject button if you needed to push it after round 2, after round 5, or, anywhere in between.
Well, I think it's a really good one. Look, Marshall looks like, even if, regardless of the ruck sharing role he does with Ryder, he was around the mark of that top 5 to 10 forwards for us last year. Support that pick with that additional pick of Marshall, and now all of a sudden you've got that 2-week window to be able to look at Preuss and go, okay, you've got the Saints, all right, you've got Fremantle. They're the easier of the two fixtures in terms of those opening 4s. After the 2 weeks, is he in the range of what you need from him? If he is, continue on as planned, knowing you're about to get a little bit of a headwind. On the other side, if he's a little off, has Haitley the one that's flown out of the gate? Is it Heppel that's delivered better than you thought before? Is Buddy Franklin or a Joe Danaher or a Wayne Miller or an Isaac Cumming, or these guys in other lines that you're like, this is the mid-pricer or the stepping stone that is popping, I'm going to use DPP to move. And I think that would be my encouragement. If you are avoiding the set and forget premium rucks and you want Preuss for the value he can deliver, awesome. What is your plan for if it goes poorly? And you need to define what poorly is. Don't just go, he's going 75, that's poor. Well, yeah, but if Heppel's only going 65, so look at it all in totality, not just in that one thing. And yeah, I'm a big fan of every pick, not just like in drafts, but even in your salary caps, picks support picks and back up why you're doing what you do. All right, let's talk about drafts then, Kane. I'm in the middle of a draft at the moment with some friends of ours. I think the draft doctor's in this. Selby is in it. Archie, Hef from the Keeper League pod, who was on yesterday. I think Warney from AFL Fantasy is involved in it too. There's been a lot of rucks going early in that, but I don't think Preuss is going to be one of the rucks that goes early. Where do you think he goes on draft day, man?
Oh, MJ, in a 10-team league, he could very much, not be someone's first ruck.
Yeah.
I don't think that's an outrageous thing to say. Again, it only takes one person, as we always say, and I think someone will probably have him in that 7, 8, 9 range, just hoping, he's at a new club, first opportunity, that unknown factor of what he could do, and getting, I'd rather take him a little early thinking he's got bigger upside, and then maybe, take a real safe ruck afterwards. But again, if that's the case, MJ, and it's the ruck line, you're probably waiting till, honestly, around 16 for me. Like, he's not a guy that I'm really going to jump over people to get.
No.
If he falls into my lap, great, but we know what it's like in draft. When you start getting to those rounds, there's much for muchness. Like, it's one of those things where, someone might be really confident in him, take him a bit earlier. Some people won't.
Yeah.
For me, it just depends what rucks have already gone, who's on the board. But really, I've got him best case, as I said, low 90s in a dream team draft, a SuperCoach. Maybe you can nudge triple figures if everything fell his way. But when you're in draft, MJ, as you know, like, you do have to think about the Scott Life sets. Big Oscar McInerney's getting his first crack, and it's always a challenging line outside of the very clear top 3 in my book. And then obviously Rowan Marshall, who I'd actually have valued as a forward. I think he's more valuable there in what he delivers.
Yeah.
But after that, it's going to be personal preference. And for me, as I said, he's probably around 15, 16, even 17, 18, those last sort of on-field spots.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's in that range, isn't he? He's, the Toby Nankervises are around there, the Sam Drapers are around there, these guys that you go, look, if you don't lock in an early ruck, you're waiting right till the end of your on-field positionals before you go in and drafting him. I think he's going to be a really solid option for you this year. And if the upside goes great at the start of the year, awesome, run it, take it. Equally, if he just holds base range, then you get what you pay for in a draft, don't you, at that point?
Yeah, and you take a second ruck, MJ, probably not much after.
Yeah.
A guy that, again, you could probably team him up with a big Oscar McInerney. You could maybe even team him up with a Nick Nat in in DT. Like, if you take in Preuss, you're probably going to have a decent backup. You're probably going to be looking at the matchups. Hey, Preuss has got Gorn. I'm probably going to go to my other guy. He's not a guy that this is my ruck week in, week out. It will be a little bit matchup dependent. And I think you're just sort of hoping for the best, really. It's not going to be a big outlay on, the draft pick you have to use. So really, if you can just hold it down in the mid-80s, you're probably happy. Yeah,
look, the upside, there's plenty of it there in salary cap formats of the game in drafts. He looks like he could be a nice little bumper for you at the very end of your draft if all things go well. Kane, appreciate your work as we've talked about Braydon Preuss.
No problem.
If you want to go read the article on him or any of the other players revealed so far, it is online now for you at coachespanel.tv. All the links for all the podcasts of every player revealed are also there, where you can check it out via Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your Apple Podcasts. And at coachespanel.tv is where you can find the links to join our Patreon supporter group. They're getting 24-hour early access to these podcast episodes, exclusive team reveals, special community within a community, hidden groups, cash league prizes, and a bunch of other conversations and content you won't get anywhere else outside of that Patreon supporter group. All your links at coachespanel.tv. Tomorrow, we're one step away from that top 5. Number 6 in the 50 most relevant. Who will he be? I'll tell you tomorrow.